Hi, I'm Suzi D. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Suzi.
Woo! Gives me a minute here to get up here. Woo! All right. My sobriety birthday, I love the way y'all say that, is September 29th, 1987. It's probably the first day I ever really told the truth about myself and my condition. I knew it for a long time. I've known I've been an alcoholic. I got a home group. It's in Cary. It's called There's a Solution. It meets Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you're ever in the Raleigh-Cary area, call one of us. We'll drag you out there. We'll feed you. Heck, we might even drive back with you to come visit. But Tuesdays or Thursdays, we have a great group, and we love to see you. And I met my sponsor at my very first AA meeting, and you'll hear about that in a minute. And probably the greatest gift I've been given is being able to pass the message on. I mean, that's what it's all about. Doesn't matter who it is, if it's a sponsee, if it's somebody I'm meeting in Detox or on a psych ward or at a jail. It's truly the highlight of my life is to carry this message. I used to say I come by alcoholism honest. I don't know what I was thinking, but, I come from a family, that definitely had their share of alcohol. My father said, oop, I'm getting in trouble, Mary. Sorry, I just put it there. All right, I'm not in trouble anymore. My father was a doctor and a dentist. My mom was a psychologist. And I bring that up just because my family looked pretty normal. Things looked pretty well from the outside. All was good, except, every night, just about, there was some kind of shenanigans and a lot of drinking and a lot of partying. And it could be a party for the opera, tucks and tails, and a lot of fancy people, and me running around with a little ashtray dipper and dumping all the ashtrays at, 7 years old. And in the morning, we were talking around the table tonight about in the morning I'd drink all the leftover drinks that all the ice had melted. I'd drink all those in the morning real quick, cleaning up. I was a good little cleaner-upper. But, I was raised around alcohol, and my father drank at night after work. He was a dentist, like I said. And my mama, she began to drink a little bit different. She had a little different drinking pattern than my dad did. But I was a good kid. I was really smart, good in school. I had 2 older brothers. I had a younger baby brother I wasn't too fond of, but I got left with a lot. Just true, And so I everything pretty normal. But inside here, right about here, there was a whole lot going on up there. And I often was worried that, other people were a little bit smarter than me, a little bit prettier than me. Other people got breaks I didn't get. I got kind of the crappy end of the stick, if you know what I mean. So I was always thinking a lot about other things and what other people were thinking about me. It went from a very early age. It was in volleyball practice. It didn't matter if it was in school. If I got an A, it was a lower A than somebody else. It was just always on me, I guess is the best way to say it. And I was raised right. My family took us to church. By the time I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a saint or an angel. I was really hoping for that. It didn't happen, but I was hoping for it. I believed in God. And the more I started to pray, because things happened to my family, very alcoholic things happened, a lot of yelling and kicking and fighting and screaming, and cars wrecking into the garage, the living room wall was also the same wall as the garage, and my father going through that wall not once but 3 times, pulling in, and scary things as a young kid, seeing alcoholism up front and center and thinking, I never do that, I'll never drink like that, And I remember praying and nothing changing in our life, and, I remember being at going into middle school, I remember being at a football game. I had older brothers, so I often went to the football game with them. And I remember being up there, and they called us down. They asked for Suzi and Mike and Mark, and they called us all down there. And the family priest was in the office, and he said, I'm sorry to tell you, but your father, he drove off a cliff drunk, he killed himself. And, I'm thinking immediately, why couldn't it have been my mom? Because I love my dad. My dad loved me. I didn't feel that way toward my mom at all. It's unfortunate, but I just didn't. By then, she'd be drunk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I couldn't bring a friend home. She'd be somebody with a Jim Beam bottle and a nightgown on, passed out on the floor. So that was kind of what I was raised in. So when that happened to me, and I say that word very carefully, my reaction to that was, well, if that's God, who needs that? And I've heard this, I see it all the time, and I hear it when I work with other people. I hear it at the podium. We have this severing. If you ever knew God at all, oftentimes we have a severing in life from God, from that spiritual connectedness as a little kid. I did trust God to a degree when I was a kid. I absolutely did. I believed in God. I knew there was a God. I knew it was real. You couldn't tell me different. But when that happened, it was severed. And I never went back to that whole thing. I never went back to another church after I buried my father. I didn't even go to people's funeral. I didn't want to. I didn't believe. I lost my belief. And, as a young girl, 13 years old, going into my 13th year, I think I was still 12, but give or take, I can't remember. I remember my first real drink, other than those little sips of beer for, giving your dad a beer, drinking a sip and not telling him and handing it to him, that kind of drinking. I was 12 and I had my first real drink, and there were some really cute boys, and my brothers let me come to school with them. I was so impressed with myself, and this boy said, "Come here," and, I got 3 of the 4-pack of Mickey White Mouth beers, and they're like strong, pretty strong, like, malt liquor beer. And because I'd been so experienced drinking all those small drinks, I remember drinking 2 of them and feeling kind of warm and kind of relaxed, It was good. I was excited. And I think I started talking a lot. But anyway, by the 3rd one, I was lifted up, man. This was good, And then I don't remember anything after that. So they found me. My brothers found me like 2 hours later. I was on the side of the kind of the woods by the side of the school, and they found me, and I had lost one shoe, and I had vomit on the other foot, and my shirt was all buttoned funny. I guess I'd been busy, or somebody was busy, but I was very friendly that evening. So I can just stop now and tell you that's my drinking story. I drink too much, I get very fun and friendly, I pass out, but usually I vomit before I pass out, That's just my story. And, so I'm highly allergic to alcohol, and I had no idea. I was so allergic that I threw up the first time I drank. And I didn't mix anything, I had a bad reaction. You think a regular girl, after something like that, she'd go home. Her parents would, pretty much almost kill her. She'd be on restriction forever. My parents didn't know. They didn't care. They were busy or drunk or gone. And, I got away with it. But I remember thinking, I can't wait to do that again. That'll be exciting. What are we going to do next weekend? That was what I was thinking. And a regular, normal kid probably would have been, oh my God, I can't go to school tomorrow. What will that boy think? What will he tell his friends? What did I do last night? I wasn't embarrassed at all. It was as if it didn't even happen. And I just started drinking immediately like that with older people. I began to be a weekend warrior early on. I was the girl with 2 red Solo cups, with the kegger. I always had 2. I knew that I could run out easily and I wasn't gonna. This is how I drank. And oftentimes, I drank more than I wanted to, and I didn't even realize that I was close to passing out. I think I physically drink fast, like quickly, as well as I drank too much. And I'd end up waking up or coming to in the back of a pickup truck that I'd never seen in my life, and wondering, looking out, seeing if I know anybody at the party or if I knew the house or anything. That was normal almost. Consequences started very early for me, and that's why I know that consequences don't get an alcoholic sober. For us, the only consequence that works is death, I believe, and you'll hear in a little bit that those consequences just got worse, By the time I was 14 years old, I was a full-time runaway on the streets, living downtown Seattle. By the time I was 17, I was a daily drinker. And that helped because I had a lot of friends that were in the bar industry, and I was able to get a lot of alcohol that way. I'd clean bathrooms, I'd clean up puke, I'd do anything, and they'd give me all kinds of liquor and money. It just allowed me to live that way, I had a job, and I was finishing school with the program downtown Seattle for homeless kids, so I graduated at 16 with honors. And there was a woman that was really, I don't know if you all have this, but you can remember back probably in your youth, there was somebody that stepped up for you and said, hey, you're of value, and I think you could really do well. And she was like, I'm going to get you into a really good college in California. They got a scholarship program, and if you write, like you can write, Suzi, I know you can. If you write an essay, I'll put it in for you and see what happens. And I got a full ride to a California college. And, I was pretty excited, and I thought, finally, I'm not going to be living like this anymore, living in tenement buildings, living with people I don't even know, or people I don't want to know, trying to get a hotel room and telling some guy to get a hotel room and then tell him to go get beer and then shutting the door, putting furniture by the door. And then when he bangs on the door, I call the cops, and then I have a hotel room for a night. Now, that was a common occurrence for me at 16, 17 years old. So it was a relief to know I was going to go to college, and have a dorm room and have a clean bed and a place to sleep. I was really excited. I don't know about you, but I start over often, even with a new boyfriend, a new job, a new city, and that was what I was looking for, was a new start. And I went to, the Green Dolphin, one of my favorite places to drink and shoot pool. Planned on making a little bit of money because I was pretty good at pool. Nothing personal, pretty good. So I went there and started making a little bit of money, and I ended up in Dallas, Texas 2 days later. in a van with people I'd never met in my life, and it was frightening. I'd been drinking, and I pretty much believe that there slipped something in my drink, and I have no recollection of it. It was nothing I did to try to intend my way to get there, by the way. I had no idea. I was frightened. I had missed my chance, my window to go to school. I no longer had a bus ticket. I no longer had the entrance to school, and I was too arrogant to call the school in California and tell them, I have a problem. I really need some help. I'm drinking too much, and I couldn't even get on the bus. Too arrogant. So what do I say? Oh, I don't like those tree-hugging hippies in California anyway. You know how we always have an excuse when we blow something? Like, it's no big deal. It was a big deal. I gave away a lot of things. You know, and at 19, I gave away a baby. I, had an abortion, and that was, to me, that would be a big deal. But when I was drinking, it wasn't a big deal. And it was just another thing that I gave away, like volleyball, like my schooling. I attempted another couple of times to go to college and couldn't. I would drink my way out of college in a matter of a couple of weeks because I drink until the beer is gone, or the wine is gone, or you're so tired of me, you've dropped me off somewhere. You know, that's the way I drink. You know, it's not very fun. You don't have a lot of good company, but that's what I would do. And then I would straighten myself up for a couple more weeks or a month or so. I'd get a job. I'd start over. I'd date a nice guy. Somebody could take care of me, you know. Finally found one of those guys that didn't like to drink like me. And I thought, this is perfect, you know, and he did other things, but I didn't care. As long as he could babysit me while I drank, I was happy. And, you know, that only worked for a while because I was still there and I was still drinking and I was still in so much pain and I had no relationship with my family. I'd already, you know, pretty much sabotaged any chance of ever really having anything to do with my mom and my brothers anymore. I had my father had a bunch of tools back in the day in a garage, and I just let somebody know that garage door was open often, and they went and robbed it, you know, and I got half the proceeds. So to think that I'm capable of doing something like that to my own family, you know, those are the kind of things that I'm starting to slip morally to a place that I can't even barely look at myself in the mirror. I'm doing things I never did before, not just with people, but, you know, street scamming for gas money, going to AMPMs and stealing beer right out of the cabinet and just walking out like I own the place, which I didn't. I mean, the last job I got fired from a 7-Eleven, if that tells you anything. You know, it's pretty bad. So, you know, I started thinking of other ways to help. I knew I had a problem. I knew I drank differently than other people from the time I was a kid. I mean, I'm the girl laying across the pool table and people are screaming at me to get off the table and I can't even hear them. You know, I'm blacked out. So I knew for a long time I drank differently. I was never like somebody that said, oh, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, must be my denial. You know, it wasn't like that. I knew all along, but I didn't want to quit. I like to drink. I actually think it was my right to drink. After what I'd been through, it was my right to drink. I earned it. I come by it honest, like I said, you know. I worked hard to be able to handle those consequences. And they were just juggling consequences. That's all they did. It seemed like up until I was about 22 years old, and then I went and saw a psychiatrist. And, you know, he asked me a couple questions, and like us, our book says we can't answer without reserve. We can't tell the truth to people. We can't even tell their own family what's going on. But we honestly can't even tell a psychiatrist, somebody who could help us, or a doctor, you know. I tell them, oh, I drink a few, you know. No, I don't. It's not a few. I start with a few, but, you know, I don't drink a few, you know, and I have a hard time sleeping. Well, I wonder why, because I'm drinking so much. I have to drink in the middle of the night to go back to sleep, you know, or I'm doing other crazy shenanigans keeping me up for 3 days. But whatever, I'm never honest, and they can't help me. And then they misdiagnose me and give me a voucher for housing, you know, because I have a mental health issue, which I didn't. Some do, but I didn't. And I took advantage of a lot of really good doctors and stuff because I wanted help according to me, the help that would help me get what I wanted. You know, and at 24, 25 years old, I mean, it was ugly. I weighed probably, you know, I don't know, maybe 95 pounds if I was lucky. You know, and I was thinking I'm pretty good, size 0, I'm looking hot, you know. I'm not, but I'm thinking I do. You know, and I'm trying to, once again, find a way back to school because, you know, that's in the back of my head always from the time I was a kid. Just go to school and you'll straighten your life out, you'll get a job, you'll be okay, all will be well. I always thought outside circumstances, if I could just get them right, if I could just clean up and get an apartment, if I could just find a nice man that went to church, that's what I need. You know, if I could just get stable enough to hold a job and be all right, you know, and it just didn't come. And one day I was in a trailer and it was a very nasty situation. It was in the back of the trailer court. We were, you know, basically squatting in the place. It was it was unlivable. It was filthy dirty, had no lights, no water. And we were laying in there doing drinking a bunch and doing some other shenanigans. And the next thing I know, I fell asleep, I think, for a short period of time on a bunch of dirty blankets and an old sleeping bag. God knows whose bag it was or where it was from. But I remember sleeping a little bit, and the birds were starting to chirp, and the light was coming in the trailer. And my ex-boyfriend he worked for the telephone company, I think, for like 3 months ever, I think was his top record for holding a job. But he learned enough to be dangerous. He could hook up to another person's phone line, splice it, So it was good. It'll come in useful in a minute. Meanwhile, I'm just laying in there, and I'm seeing the light come in, and I get up, and I look out the window, and there's a man and a woman, and I'm assuming they're married. And he has this beautiful baby, maybe 7 or 8 months old. I don't know how old. And he throws the baby up, and he kisses the baby, and I think, I'll never have that. I'll never have a family. I'll never have a husband. I can't love anything but alcohol. I need help. God, help me. And it just kind of fell out of my mouth. God, help me. And it wasn't a kind of prayer where I knelt or went to church. It was just kind of came out of me just as desperate and as needy as I'd ever been in my life. I wanted help. And I was in that trailer, and I heard, like from behind me, I heard, pick up the phone. And it was almost like somebody was there. And, nobody else was in the trailer except my boyfriend in the bathroom. And I heard it again, Susie, pick up the phone. And I could see the phone cord down the hall. It was, a single wide trailer. And I remember just pulling the cord. I know there were telephone cords back then. And I pulled the cord, and the phone had push buttons. And I pushed a 0, and a woman said, "This is the operator, can I help you?" And I just burst into truth. I said, "I am an alcoholic. I can't stop. I need help. Please, God, help me. Please help me." And I'm sure I'm swearing. I'm saying the things I'm doing. I can't stop doing things. I have nothing. I lost my whatever. I have no money. I'm basically penniless. Please, somebody help me. And she responded, "Oh, honey, it's going to be okay." And there was a peace for a minute, and then a reality of what I just said. The police are going to come. So I hung the phone up, and I was very concerned that SWAT was going to come. And I was more upset when they didn't come, because I was expecting them to come, But why I waited for that moment, a slightly paranoid I waited. And I thought to myself, when I looked down at that old green carpet shag, I thought there's probably enough stuff in the carpet alone, I'll go to prison. And I thought, maybe that's good. Maybe I'll have a long enough time to stop everything. Maybe I can get free. And that sounded good. And then the phone rang in, which doesn't usually happen in those kind of places. And I picked up the phone, and a man said, "My name is Ron, I'm with King County Detox. Is there anybody who wants to get well today?" And he didn't say anything like, "Do you need a breakfast sandwich and an Uber?" Or, you know what I mean? He didn't offer to go by Walmart for me. He just said, point blank, if you want to get well, there's a bed. You have to claim it by 9:30 if you want to get well. And I said, "I'll try." I remember saying, "I'll try." And I'd had moments of clarity like that before, where I knew I was in trouble when I blew it at school, when I didn't get on that bus, when I ended up in Texas, I knew I'd blown it. But for some reason, the change was I turned from the drink, and I got up to the street, and I looked for a bus, and a bus just came. And I went and took that bus downtown, and I'll never forget, I put the bottle of Old English in the like that recyclable thing, and I just remember walking in and going up to the 5th floor, and I always thought the 5th floor was crazy floor. Well, look where I was going, pretty par for the course. And I surrendered myself to them. And, as soon as I did that, everything started to fall into place. It was the craziest thing. They didn't know what to do with me. They took my blood pressure. They had me see a doctor. He said to me, "Ma'am, I don't know if you understand, you're dying of alcoholism. You weigh 89 pounds. And you've lost all your bone mass, and you have 4 teeth left on the roof of your mouth. And you probably haven't eaten in 5 days, and probably no fluid in at least 2. You're lucky to be alive, ma'am." And that's what he said to me, and I was like, "I'm fine. I'm always fine, And it didn't mean a whole lot, because there were the other guys around there that were literally the bums, the pee in the pants drunks. I wasn't that bad, And it's so funny, we can even be in a treatment environment or at a meeting and we can find somebody always worse than us. It's just funny how that works. Our minds are amazing, crazy things up there. And I'm so glad that that woman said to me, well, I don't know what to do with you. You can't even eat a cheese sandwich. I think I'll put you in the AA meeting. So it was the tail end of the AA meeting, and this woman said something profound, I guess. She said, I haven't had a drink in 10 years and I'm free. And I was like, that's crap. And I just had an opinion. I didn't know you couldn't tell opinions there. Never been to AA. But I let her know I thought it was crap. And they ended the meeting. Nobody spoke about it. And I was like, see, they're not going to do it because it is crap, right? That's what I'm thinking. But she came up to me and she said, what's your name, honey? And I said, my name's Suzi. She said, are you done for good and all? Have you had enough yet? Nobody ever asked me that, if I'd had enough. And then she said, are you willing to go to any lengths in Alcoholics Anonymous to stay alive? And I said, I don't know, I guess I can try. And then she said, are you willing to believe in God? And I was like, oh, here we go. Sundresses, church, I don't belong, God killed my dad. All my old ideas just started in. And she stopped. She said, group of drunks, good orderly direction. Can you do one of those? And I said, I guess I'll try. Yeah, I can do that. And so she came across, she was sitting down at a table, she came across, and here's all these nice men talking to other people in Detox. Men are in nice suits, and I get this woman bringing me in a number. I'm like, not excited, right? So she jumps across, and it wasn't a phone number, it was the address to her home group. And she said if I met her there at 7:30, and every week she would be there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when they met. She'd come an hour early and read the book with me. This book, Alcoholics Anonymous, line by line by line. She said, this is how I got free. Somebody read this book to me, and during the transformation that they occurred in their life from working the steps, I'll do it with you. I'll pass it on. And she said, if you'll have it, and if you'll be willing to come, don't be late. And I'll tell you, I had 2 more days there, and I met her that first night, and I went. And I got there on a bus. It's amazing what you can do when you want to. And I got up, got there, and it was a place called Vista was the name of the meeting. And she took me, to the side. They had like a little coffee bar. And we sat over there, and she got the book out. She showed me the empty blank pages in the front of the book and said, that's what you know about alcoholism. It's not a bad thing. It's just true. It's just true. And it's probably good you don't know. Because, she runs into a lot of people that know a lot. I'm glad I didn't have any information. I'm glad I pretty much finally was at the end of myself, and I didn't know that was where God was. I just didn't know that. But I was finally at the end of me. And I think she could tell. And, she started to read the book to me. She explained the stories. She had me at night when I went to the recovery house that I was in for 9 months more. She had me read stories at night and underline everything I could identify with. And then I'd call her and talk to her about the stories, and then she'd read the front part of the book to me. And when she read the forewords, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so boring, But she was very kind. She'd read a foreword or two and then read the doctor's opinion. And she'd ask me the questions, are you maladjusted to life? Have you ever had alcoholic torture? Do you know what that is? Do you know what it's like to want to drink so bad that you'll lie to your family and go out and get it? Or that you'll drink a beer that has a cigarette butt in it, but you need it so badly you'll drink it? And I remember it even, there were days when I would lie at work. The few jobs that I hold, I'd lie to my boss, I think I'm getting a fever and a headache. Whew, I think I got the flu. And then I'd go down the alley and go into the Chinese restaurant and drink a couple of drinks really quick because I couldn't stay there. Somebody might come. And then I'd go home. But I needed a couple of drinks. My mind was always, that obsession of the mind was constant. I was always thinking about a drink. And I asked her, what am I going to do about that? How is that am I going to always fight that? She said, no, that's what I was talking about that night. I'm free, Suzi. And you can be too. But I have to make the sacrifice, and I have to work with other alcoholics. Suzi, it's in the sacrifice of my time, my money, and my ability to put other people before myself. That's what treats my alcoholism. And, I didn't really understand in the beginning. She had me go through the steps. Back then, I had, some other ulterior issues, I thought. And she made it really clear. She said, let's look at your alcohol history. I want you to write your first step. And it was very clear, I've been alcoholic since I was 12 years old. What a surprise, you know. I am bodily different than my fellows. When I drink alcohol, I have to have more. If I'm not drinking alcohol, I'm thinking about going and getting alcohol. And it doesn't stop. It's one or the other or both. And there's no surrender to it. I can get stopped for a bit, but I can't stay stopped. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, they told me there was a way to stay stopped. And that seemed like a whole lot of power. But I was all in. I was ready to do anything, and I was willing to do anything to do that. I started working the steps with her, like I said, and by the time, the third step to me was real simple. I didn't know anything about God. I'd had this old idea of God that he didn't like me, and he certainly didn't like my dad. But, like she said, why don't you just lay those things to the side and turn toward a God that will love you and care for you? She said, how about trying that? And I said, sure, I can try that. And then she said, do you believe I believe in God? I said, oh, we all know you believe in God. And she was a lot. She was a lot, if you know what I mean, to me at the time. She did God this, God that. Whew, it was a lot, But, and I just kind of took the action. I knelt, I said the prayer, and she read. Next, we launched a vigorous course of action, and I immediately went into my inventory. She didn't stop. She didn't give me a week. Read this 30 times, practice that, pray, do a jig out in the backyard, then come back. She didn't have any other ulterior, extra special things to do other than do what the book said. It was crazy. And I'd already collected evidence in the second step. I already knew I couldn't fix myself. I tried all these other things. That was clear evidence. I cannot fix my own problem. It was absolutely clear. In the first step, I knew I was drinking against my will. If that isn't powerlessness, I don't know what is. So the steps were proven to me through her work. She was showing me that transformation was occurring in me as she was telling me. And it was so cool. She says, you don't seem to realize, but God is bearing witness in you by solving your problems. I'm seeing the hand of God in your life. That's what I get out of it, she used to say. It is so beautiful. Please come. Let's sit down and read. She was so excited to be with me. She had an attitude of enthusiasm, and she was excited and happy to watch people recover from a fatal malady. I'm so glad that, she took me through these, the first couple of stories and Bill's story, and then there's a solution and stuff. It brought me to understand how wide alcoholism really is, how it affects all areas of my life. I began to really realize this thing had to get severed. It had to get severed. And the only thing so far, everything that I'd read, I needed a spiritual solution. And I was going to have to come to find that. But it would come and meet me if I just simply worked the steps. And so that's what happened. And after an inventory, it was the first time I probably, not just told the truth, but the first time I really saw the truth about my childhood. It was the first time I ever really saw that I caused most of my own problems. I was the problem. I never knew how selfish I was, that I was often very manipulative and self-centered to people, that, I know it's hard to believe, that I was difficult. But, I caused a lot of heartache in my own family, a lot of dissatisfaction. My mom, so I had been in an ambulance a couple of times, and my mom would shake when an ambulance would come. Many years later, sober, I'd sit with her, and she would actually shake. It would just bother her so much. She'd be so afraid. It was after 2 older brothers and then me, the 3 of us, she couldn't take anymore. The damage that we do to our families, I try to talk about that because in the 4th step, it was the first time I ever really saw what I did to them. And that you can't go back and just say, hey, geez, sorry about that. And me by amending it and accepting what I did and being honest and then amending my life and not ever living like that again with them. I can't make up, but I can be the daughter that I hadn't been. I can be kind to her. I can be loving. I can call her every single Sunday, regardless if she's a drinker. I just call her earlier in the day, and that's what I did for a lot of years. My mom got sober. I was 12 years sober when my mom got sober. So it was a wonderful thing to see somebody get sober. And she didn't get sober with me in AA. She never gave me an amends. I'd been looking for it. She didn't go to church and get it. I believe she had a moment of clarity with God in a hospital, and she never drank again. It was miraculous, So, I really believe that God, I've seen a lot of people get sober in a lot of ways, and I never know how did they get sober. If I did that, I'd be drunk. We always joke about that, or I couldn't do that. I'm glad I'm not in charge of any of that. God just saw fit to get me sober with the people around me. I believe that woman was a divine appointment. I believe if she had not kept her commitment that day to her home group and go up to the detox and fulfill that job that day, if she had sent one of her sponsees, I may never connected with anyone, and I might have gotten out of the detox in 2 days and still been, drinking by that night. But she managed to fulfill her commitment. And my sponsor was big on commitments. If you take a commitment, you, by golly, better be there, And I wasn't afraid she was going to beat me up, but I knew that I had to follow through. And it was so good to finally follow through. I was under the impression many years of my life that if something better came up on Saturday, who needs that wedding? If a nice guy asked me out, I'm going there. I'm not going to that dumb old boring wedding, family wedding. So what? There's drinks over there. I got to go. I always just went where fun was or where I wanted to go. I never, RSVP, what is that, But, I was always that way. I did what I wanted to do, And my home group that she brought me into, I didn't know I could get a different home group. I just got hers, And you can get a different home group, but I just took hers because I didn't know what else to do. And, immediately she had Charlie come and show me how to put the chairs up, and I could never put them straight, and he'd always fix them, and I knew he was fixing them. But, I just learned how to serve. I learned how to do something I didn't like to do. She said, I hope every single day you do something uncomfortable. It'll remind you how important this way of life is. Don't ever get comfortable, Susie. It's a dangerous place to be. I just remember simple things like that. And, pretty soon, we're, doing my amends. And one of the best amends I think I ever had, I always talk about money because I think a lot of people never talk about money amends. But they're probably some of the most powerful amends, especially for me. I went to the AM, PM, the place where the corporate office. And I went to go, I think it was like $180 or something. I can't remember what the amount was of what I figured I stole. I told my sponsor I stole from this store. I bought all these, Old English there, whatever I was drinking back then. And she said, well, how much money? And I go, I don't know how much money, some money, And she said, pray about it and God will give you a number. And I was like, yeah, right, please. So I prayed about it and I heard 180 in my spirit. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening, She was right. My sponsor was right. It used to make me so mad. Sometimes she was always right. And it wasn't that she was right. She just was living right. That's what was happening. And I didn't know the difference. So $180, and I go there to the corporate office, and they're like, we don't know what to do with you, lady. We're glad that you're telling the truth, and I see you're all choked up and tearing up, and we don't know what to do with the money. Why don't you keep it? Don't buy beer. They didn't know what to do. And I was like, no, I don't care what you do. Take the money. You got to take the money. And finally, the general manager just came out, and he took the money. I don't know if he took it and bought his family a dinner for the weekend or somewhere, but I didn't have it anymore, and it was important that I just gave it. It was the first time that I ever really just stepped up and practiced our tradition of self-supporting. It was the first time I really had done that ever in my life, And, early sobriety was great for me. I had high highs and low lows, and they didn't try to medicate me. I'm so glad. I just was staying sober, My sponsor would throw me in the car, and she'd have other people take me to other meetings, and I'd watch her speak, and we'd go to the prison, eventually, and I loved doing that because it was so powerful to see women that had even more restrictions than I had at the Oxford House, and they were living free in there. They were living free behind the walls. And here I'm complaining about having anything I want to choose for dinner, 3 different items at the Oxford House that I was living at also had food for us. But, I could choose to eat or not. I could choose between 5 and 7 when I could go to eat. I had freedom. They had no freedom, and they were much more living, on the cuff of reality, and we're kind to each other. There's no air conditioning in the jail sometimes, and in other parts of the country, it gets hot, like it does here, and not complaining about it, but praying about it and asking God to, ask somebody nicely, can you turn the fans this way? I remember those conversations in the jail and hearing those girls talk about, well, some days you just need an extra shower. I didn't have that kind of acceptance. But I needed to hear that, I was thinking I was going to go to the jail and help them, because now that I've worked the steps, I'll help you. It wasn't for me. I got help. I needed help. Like I say often, I need a lot of help. So I met a guy, I know, shocking, in AA. The first guy I met wasn't great. I didn't know the difference, But the second guy I met, luckily, it wasn't so bad, and I dated with my clothes on. And I always say that because, the first guy that I really dated, I dated him. He brought me home one night. This was when I was drinking. He brought me home one night. And this is just a normal story for me when I'm drinking. He brought me home, and the top of the stairs where I lived, the door was busted in. So he goes, well, you can't stay here. So I stayed with him. I dated him for 2.5 years. I went out with him once, you know what I mean? So that's kind of how my dating was. So she said, we got to get rid of that. You can't date like that anymore. So you got to date appropriately. The neckline comes up, skirt line goes down, and we dress appropriately for AA as well as for other things. And she taught me a lot about that, about living right, And, I want to be known for who I am and what I can bring to a situation or a circumstance, what I can give. I don't want to be known for how I dress. Oh, Suzi, everybody knows Suzi. I don't want to be Suzi like that, So she taught me a lot about that, and I met this nice guy, and we dated, like I said, all with my clothes on, and he actually stuck around. I don't know if we had a problem or what, but he stuck around, and he courted me. I had never been courted in my life, and he courted me, and we got married. We had this little baby, beautiful little boy. And, after what had happened many years ago with me losing that child, because it wasn't a loss, I gave that baby away. I did. I never thought God would let me have a baby. Because, see, I still had those old ideas of God many years into my sobriety. Didn't mean I didn't believe in God or I didn't access God and I didn't pray every day. Of course I did. But I still, every once in a while, would have an old idea pop. And, I remember having that little baby and thinking, God will let me have this baby. How amazing is that, And I remember that little boy, he turned into the best little prayer. We'd be driving down the road, and I taught him, like, when an ambulance would come, we'd pull over. Back in the old days, people pulled over, but I know we don't do that anymore. But we'd pull over, and he'd say, let's say a prayer for him. Mama, dear God, please just fix what's wrong with those people and get them back on their road in their motor home or whatever it was. And, he was so genuine and so sincere, and I thought to myself, if only I could pray like that. Just straight up. In the circumstance and for others. How beautiful is that? I didn't do that. He did that. God, my understanding, did that, And, he was just a good kid all the way around. I was very fortunate. I knew God gave me a good kid. I couldn't handle some ADHD troubled child that was out, jumping off of roofs and stuff. I just don't have it in me. I don't think so. God was just very kind. He was a super smart kid. He used to put Band-Aids on the dog. I mean, I knew he was going to be in medicine somewhere. And when I was, he was like 6 years old, and I think I'm going to take, I was like 13 or 14 or 13, maybe 12, probably 12 years sober. And I remember feeling him when I meditated one morning. And I would just meditate by staying still. That was the best I could do then. And I'd still smoke a cigarette outside. But I remember feeling the impression that my son was going to be a surgeon. And I never said that to anybody. I thought, well, that's a hopeful thing for a mom, But I never said anything to anyone ever. And, many years later, he wanted to go to medical school. And, he wanted to go to Johns Hopkins. I was like, my God, Sean, that's like $50,000 a year. We're probably, I don't know if you can get in. I didn't want to say that to the poor kid. You don't want to say, you don't have the grades, pal. But, he didn't have the grades, And we certainly don't have the money, if you haven't noticed. Your dad doesn't work, and I do. This is it, And so long story short, he prayed. I prayed. And he wrote an essay, and he took the test, and he got in on early entrance to Johns Hopkins. I'll never forget the day they said he got in. We both hit the floor. I hit the floor because I was worried. He hit the floor to pray and thank God, and I thanked with him, But then I was like crying because how are we going to pay for it? How am I going to tell him he can't go, How are we going to? So they get all their financial aid together, and Sean's going, it's going to work out, Mom. People in AA, when you're really in bad financial problems, it'll be fine. Just, God cares. He'll do everything. Just let go of it. All that crap, and I'm thinking, and that's how Sean's acting, like, it'll be fine, I'm like, it's not, I'm thinking it can't be fine. And then we get the thing back, and it was like $30,000 left of the bill. They gave 21 toward a $50,000 bill. So my son said, well, I guess I got some work to do. I would have been like, you're not going. You can't go, and he would have been upset, and that would have been the end of the night, right? Well, he gets up there, and, he starts going on the computer. He goes and calls some people that he knows. some friends that he made working at Starbucks that were all in a think tank group, and they came up with companies that might support him, and he started trying to get some funding. And the next thing you know, is a doctor out of California saw his email and talked to him and interviewed him and paid for him to have a full ride to Johns Hopkins if he kept a 3.6. And that was hard. He also had to work because he wasn't rich and famous like some of the other kids that go to be a doctor. So he did that. And he got out of medical school, and now he's in his residency, and it's year 5 of a residency. The kid works like 95 hours a week. It's nutty. And he is a trauma surgeon and a burn surgeon. And he'll be out, he'll graduate this coming May. Not this, a year from May. He'll be graduated, done, and doing his boards. That's God. That's principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's not Suzi Donahue just wishing on a whim. That's living and changing a life by being changed. I let God change me. I didn't make that life. I finally got to the end of myself, and I let God change me and show me how to live a better life. And I'm so glad that, I came back to God. I knew that power was everything, and that Alcoholics Anonymous is powerful enough, a good friend of mine says, to fight your alcoholism. But the power of God goes deep, and it goes so much more than just alcoholism. And I've learned to depend on God in all circumstances. I know that alignment that started the day I turned from alcohol, it's never left me. My life is in alignment as long as I stay out of collision with other people. And if I'm in collision, I'm so aware of it today. I'm so grateful to know it. And I get so easily, my feelings are still very easily hurt. I'm still a sensitive alcoholic. But I am an ex-problem drinker, and I'm grateful that I've been given the life that I've been given. There's one little section in the book, and I do this because I know Paige likes Earl Treat's story. And this is for you, Paige, okay? I'm rated as a modestly successful person. My stock of materials, goods isn't great, but I have a fortune in friendships, courage, self-assurance, and honest appraisal of my own abilities. Above all, I've gained the greatest thing according to anyone, the love and understanding of a gracious God who has lifted me from the alcoholic scrap heap to a position of trust where I've been able to reap the rich rewards that come from showing a little love for others and from serving them as I can. Thank you.